always had the upper hand, or so they thought. It's funny how karma strikes back. One moment they're untouchable, ruling with blood and money. The next, powerless and defeated, left crawling in their own shame. Drug lords thrive on fear, but what happens when they push too far? Here are the 7 times when they messed with the wrong people. And if you love deep, dark dives like this, hit that subscribe button. Number 7. Cardinal Juan Jesús Posadas Ocampo. It was a warm May afternoon in 1993. Guadalajara International Airport was buzzing with travelers, but for one man, this would be his final stop. Cardinal Juan Jesús Posadas Ocampo sat in his car, unaware that death was approaching. In seconds, chaos erupted. When the smoke cleared, the Cardinal, once a man of faith, now a shattered body, lay motionless, riddled with 14 gunshots.
A fin de que purificado de toda culpa, lo hagas sentar junto a él en la mesa de tu reino. Por nuestro Señor Jesucristo, tu Hijo, que siendo Dios vive y
At first, it seemed like a tragic mistake. A government inquiry concluded he was caught in a crossfire between rival cocaine cartels. A man of God, mistaken for a man of death, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. But was it really just an accident? Juan Francisco Murillo Diaz and Edgar Nicolas Villegas, the masterminds behind the Tijuana cartel, actually had ordered the hit. It is also believed he was getting way into investigating drug trafficking, but the assassins weren't even cartel members. They were Logan Heights gangsters from San Diego. The Tijuana cartel needed someone to take the fall. Their leader, Benjamin Arellano Félix, threw 2 of his own men under the bus. Juan Enrique Vasconez and Ramon Torres Mendez. Torres never made it to trial. He was killed in custody. Vasconez got a mere 9 years on weapons charges. No one was truly punished. But the United States wasn't done. They hunted down 9 members of the Logan Heights hit squad. 3 took plea deals, locking them away for 18 to 22 years. In 2000, Vicente Fox became Mexico's president, ending 7 decades of one-party rule. He vowed to clean up old bloodstains, and the Posadas case was back on the table. That's when the threats started. A childhood friend of Posadas revealed something horrifying. Weeks before his death, the Cardinal had been summoned, threatened, and told to keep his mouth shut. But what about? Well, Posadas had uncovered something damning: connections between high-ranking politicians, the drug trade, and prostitution. He had seen too much. But power protects power. The church pleaded with President Fox to honor his promise. Posadas' successor, Cardinal Juan Sandoval, believed this was no accident. They turned to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights for protection. But protection means little when your enemies own the world around you. Years later, in 2006, the US finally caught one of the men linked to the killing. Francisco Javier Arellano Félix, a Tijuana cartel boss. He was infamous for his elaborate drug tunnels under the US-Mexico border and had been charged in Mexico with conspiring to assassinate Posadas. Number 6. Alejo Garza Tamez. On November 13, 2010, men with guns told him he had 24 hours to live. It was an order from the Los Zetas. Most men would have run, but Don Alejo Garza Tamez didn't. At 77 years old, he was a legend in the northern hills of Mexico. He had spent his life harvesting the land and helping the people around him, and so, when the cartel knocked, Don Alejo sent his workers home, locked the doors, and armed himself. The night before the attack, he moved through his home with purpose. Morning came with the sound of engines. The killers fired a shot into the air, a final warning. Don Alejo fired back. War erupted, but Don Alejo stood firm.
Don Alejo resistió de pie un enfrentamiento que pasó de las ráfagas a las granadas. Y su huella, la de una lucha entre un hombre de 77 años contra al menos 1/12 de gatilleros, es desproporcionada. Fue detonada, explotada por una granada, y fue por donde entraron los sicarios, de acuerdo a esta reconstrucción que se hizo. Las paredes Se puede ver cómo están.
But soon the war came to an end. By the time the Mexican Navy arrived, the battlefield was empty. The cartel had fled, leaving behind only the dead and dying. There was no investigation, but Don Alejo had won something greater than justice. He had won dignity. If you were in his shoes, would you fight back or flee? Type fight or flee in the comments. Number 5. Miriam Elizabeth Rodríguez Martinez. In Mexico, when the cartels take someone, they don't come back. Families are left with silence and questions that no one dares to answer. But Miriam was different. She didn't wait for the police to help, but became the hunter. For 2 years, she searched. She studied the cartel, their movements, their hideouts. And then, in 2004, she found that her daughter Karen was gone. Her remains were discarded like trash. One by one, she tracked them down, the men responsible for her daughter's death. She passed the information to the authorities and made them act. 10 men, 10 arrests. But some of those men escaped, and Miriam knew what that meant. She knew they would come for her. On May 10, 2017, while the rest of Mexico celebrated Mother's Day, gunmen broke into her home. She ran and tried to escape, but they shot her 12 times. The people she had helped marched in the streets, but justice never came. Number 4. Manuel Torres Félix. He was a man possessed and obsessed with revenge, feared by his enemies and even by his own allies. They called him El Ondeado, the crazy one, and they weren't wrong. Born in the hills of Posadas, Sinaloa, he was raised in a land where violence was the currency. He started as a foot soldier in the Sinaloa cartel. But when his brother Javier Torres Félix was arrested in 2004, Manuel took the reins, working alongside Ovidio Guzman Lopez, the son of El Chapo, under the guidance of Ismael El Mayo Zambada. With his newfound power, Torres Félix turned into a ghost. He never slept and lived like a hunted animal when he was the real predator. That was until 2008, when everything changed. The Beltran-Leyva cartel, once allies of the Sinaloa cartel, declared war, and they sent their message in the blood of Torres Félix's son, Anastasio. Gunmen opened fire, killing his son and wounding his 4-year-old daughter and sister-in-law. Then they left a message at the scene. On behalf of your friend Arturo and his nephews Los Zetas, so you can understand, Manuel Torres. Manuel did understand. He hunted down his son's killers, dragging them into his personal hell. The war in Sinaloa exploded after that, and hundreds of deaths were left in his wake. By then, the Mexican government had him marked. The US put him on their most wanted drug traffickers list in 2011, offering millions for his capture. The answer came on October 13, 2012. Early that morning in Oso Viejo, Culiacan, Torres Félix finally ran out of luck and he was shot dead by the military. Number 3. Kiki Camarena.
I put my life into this job. What I want to see is change.
The summer of 1980 should have been a fresh start. Enrique Kiki Camarena packed his bags and set off for Guadalajara, Mexico. It was a chance to take the war on drugs to the heart of the problem. But Guadalajara was a place where those who resisted had a way of, disappearing. Camarena had spent years tracking drug smugglers in California, working undercover, but in Guadalajara, it was the big boys. Men like Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, and Rafael Caro Quintero, the architects of what would soon be known as the Guadalajara Cartel. These had built an empire on drug money, and Camarena was about to become their biggest problem. In 1982, an informant codenamed Miguel Sanchez told Camarena about a massive marijuana plantation worth millions. Camarena tipped off Mexican authorities, and in September, the raid happened. Thousands of tons of marijuana was burned. Millions of dollars in cartel revenue went up in smoke. The cartels were furious, but Camarena wasn't done yet. In 1984, he struck again. Acting on DEA intelligence, Mexican soldiers stormed Rancho Buffalo, a 2,500-acre plantation in Chihuahua. The cartel had been running a billion-dollar operation right under everyone's nose. Camarena had embarrassed the most powerful drug lords in Mexico, and that was the final hit on the nerve. On February 7, 1985, Camarena left the US consulate heading for lunch with his wife. But he never made it. A group of men, dressed as Mexican federal agents, stopped his car. They forced him into a waiting vehicle and drove away. For the next 30 hours, Camarena was subjected to torture that defied human imagination. His captors, believed to include Rafael Caro Quintero himself, wanted information.
¿A qué se dedica ahora entonces, Rafael?
¿Cómo?
¿Cuáles son sus actividades ahorita?
Ninguna. A puro andar huyendo. Por algo que ya pagué.
¿Qué hace para sobrevivir?
Donde llego que me dan de comer.
He suffered, but he never gave them what they wanted. When they were done, his body was dumped in a rural area outside La Angostura, Michoacán. His skull had been punctured with a steel rod. His body was wrapped in plastic like garbage. The cartels thought they had silenced him, but they had just started a war. The news of Camarena's death sent shockwaves through the US government. Within weeks, the agency launched Operation Leyenda, the biggest homicide investigation in DEA history. A team was sent to Mexico with one mission: find out who did this and make them pay. Investigators quickly zeroed in on the Guadalajara cartel's leadership: Gallardo, Fonseca, and Quintero. Under mounting US pressure, the Mexican government arrested Fonseca and Quintero, but Gallardo, the true mastermind, remained free. Protected by his powerful connections, he wouldn't be arrested until 1989.
Por su lucha, por su afán de lucha.
Desde su captura en abril de 1989, ha pasado 32 años preso. ¿Cómo está su salud?
Mi salud es pésima. Mi familia está haciendo un hoyo para yo ser enterrado en un árbol. No tengo pronóstico de vida ninguno, puesto que perdí todo.
The fight didn't stop there. The US was so determined to bring every suspect to justice that the DEA broke international laws to do it. They sent bounty hunters to Mexico to kidnap suspects and bring them back to American soil. It was not just the cartel, but elements within the CIA itself. In the 1980s, some theories came up flying that the CIA was allegedly turning a blind eye to cartel operations in exchange for funding anti-communist rebels in Central America, and Camarena was getting too close to the truth. His name became a rallying cry, an example of bravery. Number 2. Hipólito Mora Chávez. He was just a farmer whose hands were meant for harvesting, not for wielding weapons. But in La Ruana, Michoacán, the land had been stolen. The Knights Templar cartel had started extorting farmers, controlling the lime trade, and making the streets run red with blood. And when the government looked the other way, he did what no one else dared. He fought back.
Buenas tardes. Estoy aquí en mi casa, en La Ruana, en el municipio de Buenavista, en Michoacán, deseando, igual que todo mi pueblo.
In 2013, Mora gathered farmers, neighbors, and anyone brave enough to stand against the cartel's rule. The self-defense group started small, just desperate men with hunting rifles and borrowed courage. But they struck where it hurt, ambushing cartel outposts, reclaiming stolen lands, and proving that fear did not belong only to the innocent. For months, they fought alone. The Mexican government could no longer ignore them. In 2014, troops came in to fight alongside them. The combined forces drove the Knights Templar out of Michoacán, and for a brief moment, peace seemed possible. Mora never left La Ruana, even as other fighters moved on. He had won a battle, but the war was far from over. In 2014, his own son was killed by cartel gunmen. The cartel had changed names, but their cruelty remained the same. By 2022, Michoacán was worse than ever. The government focused its efforts on battling the new Jalisco New Generation cartel, but homegrown groups like the Carteles Unidos were tearing the region apart. Worse, many former vigilantes had switched sides. Corrupted by power and cartel money, Mora knew his words made enemies, and on June 29, 2023, the inevitable came for him. Mora and his 3 bodyguards drove through La Ruana, but this time there was no escape. The assassins blocked the road and opened fire. They set Mora's vehicle on fire as if to erase him completely, but the fire that consumed his body could never burn away his legacy. Number 1. The 2012 Nuevo Laredo Massacres. Nuevo Laredo, a gateway between Mexico and the United States, became a battlefield in 2012. Two of Mexico's most ruthless cartels, Los Zetas and the Sinaloa Cartel, enraged in a gruesome war for control. But what made 2012 one of the bloodiest years in its history? Let's rewind to 2003, when the Gulf Cartel's former leader, Osiel Cárdenas Guillén, was arrested. The Sinaloa Cartel, led by the infamous Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, saw an opportunity and set his sights on Nuevo Laredo, the Gulf Cartel's stronghold. The first major shootout happened in August 2003, when federal agents clashed with cartel hitmen in a 40-minute firefight. By 2005, Los Zetas, the former enforcers of the Gulf Cartel, split off and became their criminal empire. This set the stage for an all-out war. Fast forward to 2012. The Sinaloa Cartel had reignited its campaign to take Nuevo Laredo from Los Zetas. On April 17th, police discovered 14 dismembered bodies stuffed in plastic bags inside a van parked on a busy street. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or the CJNG, a Sinaloa Cartel ally, was responsible for the attack. Los Zetas didn't take long to respond. 2 days later, on April 19th, they launched counterattacks deep into Sinaloa Cartel territory, proving they wouldn't go down without a fight. The Mexican government, overwhelmed by the scale of the violence, struggled to control the chaos. But on April 24th, the Attorney General of Tamaulipas revealed that 10 of the 14 victims had no connections to any cartel. They were innocent civilians mistaken for Zeta operatives or used as a public display of terror. Some were recently deported immigrants who had been trying to rebuild their lives. If the April massacre was a statement, the events of May 4th were an all-out declaration of war. 9 bodies, all of them blindfolded and tortures, were hanged from a bridge over Federal Highway 85D. Just hours later, authorities found 14 decapitated bodies, stuffed inside ice chests near another bridge. Their heads were missing, but the cartel responsible left a message. The tactics used in the Nuevo Laredo massacres were psychological warfare, but did it work? Well, no. Instead of instilling obedience, the massacres outraged the public and law enforcement. The images of decapitated bodies, hanged corpses, and mass executions didn't just make headlines in Mexico, they were covered internationally, putting massive pressure on the Mexican government. The military crackdown intensified, and by 2013, high-ranking Zeta leaders were either dead or behind bars. The Sinaloa Cartel eventually gained ground, but at a massive human cost. But what do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and explore more untold stories from the criminal underworld. Hit subscribe and stay connected. Power never truly fades.